Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. For the past 1.5 years, the ethnic conflict in Manipur between the Meiteis and the Kuki-Zomi community, which has claimed over 250 lives, has shown no signs of ending. And while there have been brief periods of relative calm, flare-ups continue to take place regularly. And this is what happened last week. In fact, apart from the initial days, this was perhaps the most intense period of violence in the conflict. And so we are dedicating today's episode to talk about what unfolded on the ground, how the administration responded to it, and what it tells us about the crisis. And we begin by speaking to the Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah, who tells us that the flare-up took place in a small district called Jiribam.
So Jiribam is quite different from the rest of Manipur. It's outside. So Manipur is basically a valley, a central Meitei majority valley, and it's surrounded by hills, some of which are Naga majority and some with other tribes, and Kuki majority hills. Jiribam is outside of this geography completely. It's located beyond the hills and it's contiguous with Assam's Barak Valley. And its population is also like Assam's Barak Valley. It's very mixed. Neither the Meiteis or the Kuki-Zos are actually the majority population. The largest population are Bengali Muslims. And the Meiteis are the second largest. And there's a bunch of other communities, which includes Kuki-Zos, which include the Mars as well.
And so because of its unique geography and demography, Jiribam was insulated from the violence that was taking place in other parts of the state.
It hadn't seen the kind of violence that other places, with Meiteis and Kukis had coexisted to some extent earlier, had seen. It first witnessed violence in June this year. But even after that, even though there, a lot of houses were burnt, some people lost their lives in some violence, but still, there was still some efforts. And within the local communities, there was some attempts to kind of move on, try and come to an understanding, of some kind. But everything changed on November 7th.
On that day, in a Mar village called Zairon, a group of armed Meitei men launched an attack. And here it's important to note that the Mars are part of the larger Kuki-Zomi community.
And in that violence, quite a few houses were burned. And lady, a 31-year-old Mar lady, was allegedly shot. She was killed and she was burned in such a way that her whole body was charred completely, like beyond recognition. And that was a very disturbing incident, which triggered the kind of cycle of violence we are seeing now.
And she says, according to the security officials, there was no provocation that triggered this attack.
So, a lot of people were trying to make sense, why did this attack take place? And quite a few people I spoke to felt that, there was a deliberate attempt to break the peace. Or not the peace, but the, like how I said, things were kind of settling in some kind of tense, awkward way. But that is, again, speculation. But this is what, multiple people from Jiribam told me.
Now, this incident sparked a lot of outrage, especially because the family alleged that the woman was also raped by these men.
But the postmortem reports are not able to verify that because the body is burned so badly. So because of how disturbing this incident was, it drew a lot of outrage. And then, of course, there's the incident that everybody knows about, which took place on November 11th in the Borra Villages relief camp. So Borra Villages is a settlement. It's a subdivision of Jiribam. While Jiribam town has like a sizable amount of Meiteis, within Borra Villages subdivision, there's just one small cluster of Meitei villages. And a lot of these these cluster villages are a good, around 30 kilometers away from Jiribam town.
She says this cluster of Meitei villages is surrounded by Bengali and Mar villages. Now, while a lot of people there had moved to Jiribam after the initial days of the violence, around 150 people had stayed back.
The people I spoke to there said that they decided to stay back because they thought that, they need to be there to look over their land. There's a fear that if they vacate that area completely, their village will be occupied. That's what they said. So there was a relief camp that was set up within the premises of the Borra Villages police station. And the relief camp, which I visited a couple of days back, is sandwiched between the police station itself and a CRPF post, so heavily guarded. And this is the place where an attack took place on November 11th. where police and CRPF alleged that a group of armed militants came to the area and attacked the CRPF post and Borobekra police station. And because the police station and the CRPF post came under fire, security forces retaliated, and in that, 10 of these, suspected militants were shot dead. So this was a massive encounter which took place. And then in the next couple of days, we started getting more information of what actually happened, that day.
She says the next morning, the bodies of 2 men from the relief camp were found inside the houses nearby. And later, we came to know that a total of 6 people, all from the same family, were missing from the camp.
There was a 61-year-old lady, 2 of her daughters, and 3 children of those ladies' daughter, which included an 8-month-old baby. They were missing, and these are all inmates of that relief camp that I spoke about. And in the last week, their bodies have been found floating on the river. So there's the Jiri River and the Barak River. 3 of them were found on the Manipur side, and 3 of them were found in Kachar, which I said is just adjacent to it in the river. So in that one day, there were 10 Mar gunmen who were killed, 2 elderly Meitei men, and these 6 members of this family. So 18 people killed in a single incident, which is the huge body count. And after that, the cycle of violence has continued because of the abduction and killing of these 6 people. There was a lot of outrage across Manipur. Within Jiribam itself, angry Meitei people have burnt some more houses that belong to Mar people. They have burnt multiple churches. A couple of nights back, there was, during, more protests, there was an altercation between the police commandos and people, and one of the protesters was shot dead by police. So things are very tense. And so far, since November 7th, 21 people have died in Jiribam. And things continue to be really tense.
And Sukrita, during this time, we've also seen protests taking place in the capital, where the house of the chief minister was also attacked. Could you talk about what all we saw unfold there?
Yeah, so the people went missing on November 11th, which was a Monday. And the first 3 bodies were found in the Jiri River on Friday night, and the news came out on Friday night, and the next day, the outrage was massive in Imphal, and there were angry protests, and this is something we've seen throughout in the Manipur violence, that one of the key ways that people have expressed their discontent in the valley has been, by targeting the residences and offices of elected representatives. Nothing like what we saw on Saturday, though, where multiple houses and of ministers, MLAs were attacked. This includes the chief minister's personal residence in Hengang. There was no damage done, but there was an attempt by protesters to storm his residence. His son-in-law's house, R.K. Imo, who is also a senior legislator from the BJP, his house was vandalized. Multiple ministers, their houses were vandalized, and, there was quite a lot of arson. So, with the scale of protests and the violence that was playing out, once again, internet services were snapped across the Meitei majority valley and in the Kuki-Zomi majority districts of Kangpokpi and Churichandpur. Curfew was back, and as police and security forces tried to contain the protesters, multiple people were injured as well. I think around 6 people were injured, and many more were arrested. So that is the nature of protest that we saw in Imphal itself.
And Sukrita, you actually spoke to the family of those whose bodies were found in the Jiri River. Could you tell us what they shared with you and what you learned in the process?
Yeah, so I was able to travel to Borobekra, which is where the relief camp which came under attack is located. So when I went there, so there are still 109 people living in that relief camp. And 3 of those people who continue to live in the relief camp are relatives of the family that was abducted and killed. So like I told you, there was a 61-year-old lady and 2 of her daughters. So her eldest daughter is still living in that relief camp. Her name is Sandhya Devi, and 2 teenage sons of Thoibi Devi, who is one of the women whose bodies have been found. So one of Thoibi's children was also abducted and killed, and 2 of her sons continue to live in that relief camp. So the mother and her 2 daughters, they ran a tea and snacks shop in Jakuradhar, and that is where they were when this incident took place. So the suspicion is that they were abducted from their shop along with the 3 children. So here also there had been, a sense of, let's move on with our lives to the best of our abilities. And then this struck. And since then, these people are still in the relief camp. And since that day, they haven't even stepped out of the gates of the relief camp. Like the CRPF personnel not letting them. They don't want to. They're terrified. And there are no men who actually lived with them in the relief camp. All three sisters' husbands work elsewhere. Two of their husbands work in Guwahati. One of theirs works in Imphal. So it was just them there, this family of women and their children.
And this flare-up, like you mentioned earlier, has perhaps been the biggest we have seen since the initial days. Could you talk about the steps the administration has now taken in response?
So this particular incident took place on a Monday. And on Thursday, the Ministry of Home Affairs issued a notification reimposing the disturbed area status under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which we'll call AFSPA, in the jurisdiction of 6 police stations in the valley areas of Manipur. So the AFSPA is already in place in all the hill areas of Manipur. And there were just the jurisdictions of 19 police stations that were exempted from this. And actually until 2004, AFSPA was in place in all of Manipur. In 2004, following massive protests following, the alleged rape and killing of Thangjam Manorama, it was removed from the municipal areas of Imphal. Then in 2022, it was removed from the jurisdiction of several police stations. And then in 2023, just a month before the ongoing violence, it was rolled back from some more. So in a total, it was not there in 19 police stations. But now it has been reimposed in 6 more of these.
And just for the benefit of our listeners, we should mention that AFSPA gives sweeping powers to the armed forces by providing the military personnel blanket immunity for a range of actions. For example, it allows the military to open fire and even cause death against any person breaking the law or carrying arms and ammunition. It also gives them the power to arrest individuals and search premises without warrants on the basis of reasonable suspicion. And plus, there can be no legal proceedings against the personnel for these actions without the prior approval from the center. Now, AFSPA, of course, has been very controversial. But at this time, keeping the current situation in mind, is it expected to help?
So, throughout this conflict, the army and the Assam Rifles have been batting for the extension of AFSPA to, more parts of the state, saying that we're not able to, unleash our full force and to contain this thing. After it was reimposed, I did speak to some officials and they said that for now, we don't think it's going to, change how things are working operationally. What they were saying is that primarily they were counting on fear psychosis. Because of this, maybe people would feel more inhibition about, because there's a lot of open wielding of arms that's happening. So maybe that'll be contained. Yeah, so of course, and also, AFSPA is a tool of counterinsurgency. So maybe, even if, it is used to its full extent, it can only, even in the best case scenario, potentially crack down on insurgents. But the most important thing in Manipur is still going to be political dialogue, which is where, things are just not working out. They are not taking off. This conflict doesn't have a military solution. It's never going to be a police or a security or a military solution. It has to be a political solution.
Right. And with the AFSPA back, it is a clear indication that the situation in the state has not improved. Can you talk about the position that it has put the state government in now?
So, of course, when we see the kind of massive outpouring of fury against the elected representatives, the people are extremely, of course, the fury we are seeing is in the valley, in the hills already, all the groups have kind of distanced themselves from the Biren Singh-led government. But in the valley also, just a massive outpouring of fury against the government. One of the key allies of the BJP and one of its NDA partners is the National People's Party, the national president of which is Meghalaya Chief Minister Conrad Sangma. So after these protests, Conrad Sangma's party announced that it is withdrawing its support to the government. It has 7 MLAs and this will not bring down the government. They still have the numbers. It does put the current government it is in the midst of a brewing political crisis. It still has the support of the Naga People's Front, which has 5 MLAs, which has said that it continues to support the government. Of course, there are still 7 MLAs from the BJP, from amongst the Kuki-Zo communities. And, while there are 10 MLAs from the Kuki-Zo communities and they all, have condemned the state government and say that, we won't participate in any talks with N Biren Singh on the table, but they continue to be BJP legislators. So, where they stand in this, so they're technically still a part of this very government. So that is, of course, the most perplexing political position currently.
And this idea that the Biren Singh government is biased in the favor of the Meiteis, that idea still persists, right? Because as we've spoken in the past, the trust deficit is so much that the solution proposed by the Kuki-Zomis is that they want a separate administration altogether.
That was the case from day one itself. From the very beginning, the demand has been for a separate administration. From the very beginning, those groups have held Chief Minister N Biren Singh to be the main culprit behind the violence, and they have refused any engagement, or any talks that they have refused has been on the grounds that they will not engage while N Biren Singh is on the other side of the table. On that side, there's been a complete rejection of the current leadership. And of course, with the NPP also, there is a rejection of his leadership.
Now, since this recent flare-up, the pressure on the central government to put an end to this conflict has once again intensified. But on the ground, the centre so far has only managed to offer security solutions.
Perhaps it thinks that before restoration of peace, a political solution cannot be thought about.
That's the Indian Express's Deeptiman Tiwary, who reports on the Home Ministry for the paper.
So right now we see centre sending, obviously, reimposing AFSPA in 6 police stations on the fringes of the valley, between the hills and the valley. And we see 70 companies of Central Armed Police Forces being sent to Manipur. So we now have in excess of 280 companies of Central Armed Police Forces, like the CRPF, the BSF, ITBP, in Manipur. That's more or less the centre's approach, with instructions to forces that, come what may, make sure that law and order and peace is restored, and there is a semblance of peace in the valley.
Right, and considering how divided and fraught things are between the two communities, how is the government planning to address that issue, keeping a long-term vision in mind? Does it have any plans along those lines?
Well, it has been trying to talk to both the communities. Many rounds of talks have been held between the centre through its points person for the Northeast, Mr. A.K. Mishra, who has talked separately to Kuki groups and to Meitei groups, both civil society groups and some militant groups as well, on both either side of the divide. But obviously, both the communities have dug in their heels because emotions are running high. There is a spate of violence, and which keeps spiraling out of control every few months. So at this moment, nothing has come out of these talks, because in these talks, what we understand, the only thing that has been said by these groups is their demands, and they keep reiterating their demands. And these demands are basically competing demands. So if Kuki-Zomi groups say that we want separate administration, Meiteis say that make sure that they never get separate administration. And these are all terrorists and infiltrators, and you do a census and you do an NRC and you kick all these illegal immigrants out. So in such an atmosphere, a conversation between the two groups looks highly unlikely at the moment. The centre, all its efforts, has actually last month got leaders of both the groups at least under one roof and tried to hold a meeting and sort of get them to talk to each other. But as we understand, that conversation never happened between the two groups, because none of the groups actually want to go back home being seen by their people as having spoken to the people who have killed their women and children or burned their houses down. So there is a popular anger, popular animosity between the two groups. And so the talks are not happening and are unlikely to happen until a semblance of peace, at least 6 months of peace is there in the valley and the hills, so that, the public anger comes down and they start thinking about their daily bread. And then probably there can be talks.
And Deeptiman, at this time, Biren Singh's leadership has obviously been challenged, and there have been many calls for him to resign. Could you talk about how the centre sees his leadership and why, despite everything, he continues to be in power?
yes, there have been demands about Biren Singh's removal, not just from the Kukis, but even from within the BJP, that we understand. But obviously, this is a call which has to be taken by the central leadership of the party. In fact, the top two people have to take that decision. Mr. Amit Shah has to take that decision. The Prime Minister has to take a decision in this regard. So what they're thinking, we don't know. They probably do not think that, this is a solution, or probably they think that this is a solution which can be worse than the problem, which means that probably they think that he does have some sort of a support on the ground, and removing him right now can probably throw the valley into another spate of unrest, which they do not want. Some people say that the central leadership thinks that it is Mr. N Biren Singh who can get the Meiteis eventually to the negotiating table. Many people, especially the Kukis and Zo people, they believe that he is the source of all the trouble. And unless he is removed, there can be no solution. In fact, the NPP, which recently withdrew support or announced withdrawal of support to N Biren Singh government, Conrad Sangma, the chief of the party, and the Meghalaya CM has said it in an interview to the Indian Express that there will be no solution to the Manipur crisis as long as N Biren Singh continues in the chair. So yes, there are those voices also, but probably the central leadership thinks that this is not a great solution, because the party may also lose face, because 1.5 years, despite all these demands, it has continued with N Biren Singh, and now removing him will make BJP look very poor as a party which could not decide what to do. Because if this step had to be taken, there will be questions. Why wasn't it done in the first 4 days of the violence in 2023? Or if the center decides that now Manipur needs a president's rule, then again there will be questions. Why did you let it burn for 1.5 years? So I'm sure all these things are in the minds of the central leadership, although I do not have any idea if they have any sort of solution in their mind to this problem. At least I have not heard from my sources that there has ever been any talk of a definitive solution that can be found. The only thing that keeps getting talked about is restoration of peace is the priority, and only then any of those political demands can be discussed.
Right, and the other thing we saw recently was the RSS and the ABVP put pressure on the center. Can you tell us what exactly these two organizations have said in this regard?
Okay, so RSS has been issuing statements on Manipur for quite some time. In fact, since the violence began, RSS has been issuing statements. Mohan Bhagwat has spoken about it thrice. He spoke about in his Vijayadashmi speech also in 2023. Then he spoke about it in June this year, where he said that this problem cannot be let to fester, and the government has to do something about it. In fact, questioning the government in a way. And now RSS and ABVP have gone a step ahead. An ABVP statement yesterday squarely blamed the center and the state for failing to protect the lives of innocent civilians. So this does put some bit of pressure on the government, because RSS is the ideological fountainhead of the BJP. Also, RSS has invested heavily in the valley areas of Manipur, which is essentially a Hindu population. Meiteis are followers of the Hindu religion. So RSS has its sentiments attached with the valley, and it feels that festering of this problem or continuing of the conflict is going to not only hurt the people, but eventually also hurt the BJP and the RSS in the long run, because they are the ones who are now being seen as responsible for not protecting the lives of civilians, because the state has a BJP government, the center has a BJP government. So obviously the responsibility in the eyes of the people is falling on these people, and it has also been reflected in the houses of elected representatives being burned down by the people recently, because people are taking out their anger, and that the BJP has lost both the parliamentary seats in the recent Lok Sabha in Manipur.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.